Hi, welcome to the first in a series of videos where I'm talking about grief and loss. I decided to do a series because there's so many important parts to the topic that I want to be able to share with you in a way you can hear that's manageable and that you can really let sink in. Why did I decide I got to do this series now? For two reasons. First, 2020 has delivered all of us an all-time high of grief and loss. Whether you've actually lost someone, a loved one who's died from COVID or something else, or you've had one of the many other forms of loss that this year has dealt all of us. I get the feeling that people are suffering unnecessarily. And sure, I know it's hard. I've been a grief expert for more than 20 years. I know that it's important to acknowledge the pain and the difficulty and the challenge. What I'm talking about is beyond that, where because people aren't really expert at managing loss, it means that, like any negative event in our lives, when we're not really sure what to do, we struggle more. We're making it harder. And I think a lot of people, I imagine you're making this year harder on yourself. And I don't want that for you. So I have some thoughts about how it could be different. The second reason is because as a culture, I know we're really good at figuring out, especially in the past 50 years or so with personal development and self-help, we have gotten really good at fine-tuning, ways that we can manage life experiences in a really powerful way. In the area of grief and loss, though, we are really still falling short of the mark. We are, in general, people are uncomfortable dealing with the topic, talking about the topic, even for some people thinking about it for themselves. And what happens when that's going on, it means that we're just really not on our game around that. And I want that to be different. So let's get started. If somebody said, Haley, if you had some grief wisdom, let's say a commandment, if you had to pick one, what would it be? And I would say that is work your grief or it will work you. And I've come to know this to be true in my own life and many, many people that I've helped with this. What do I mean when I say work your grief? Well, there are three things really. When you work your grief, first of all, you're intentional around your experience. Second of all, you're flexible. Third, you are accepting, which is a nice way of saying you're not judgmental, whether that's your own grief or somebody else's. So let's start with the first one. What do I mean when I say intentional? That means that, like any experience, I'm talking about grief today, but you could extend this to any negative event, any experience that challenges us in our lives. When we really have it happen to us the least and have it be that happened and I managed it the best I could the most, that's usually requires being intentional. So we're paying attention to what's going on for ourselves. So let's get into it right away. I want you to bring to mind an experience, ideally that's fresh in your mind, where you can really think about those feelings you've got about it, your thoughts about how you're managing it. One where you've been feeling you're struggling, and you'll know because it's something that's been on your mind probably since you started hearing me talk about it. I want you to bring to mind something fresh, so probably it's something recent. But if you've got something in your in your less recent history, where you'll know because the way you think about it or talk to other people about it, it's wow, I had that really tough thing happen and I don't think I handled it very well. Or, wow, I'm not sure I'm really over that. Or that comes up every once in a while. It happens to all of us. But it doesn't need to as much as it has been. Bring that to mind as I'm sharing my thoughts with you because you'll be able to actually start, if you haven't worked your grief, you'll be able to start doing that as you hear me talk about having it work out better for you. The second, talk about being flexible. It blows my mind the number of people when they talk about their own grieving or I hear them talking about somebody else. A lot of times it's somebody they really care about that they're trying to help. The idea that it's supposed to be a certain way, right? Well, no, grief works in mysterious ways, my friends. And it works differently from experience to experience. And also it varies greatly among people. So I encourage you to remember to be flexible. So that's from experience to experience, how you manage one thing, the best way isn't necessarily how you'll manage another. Also, in terms of being flexible, I encourage you, if you can bring that experience that you have in your mind right now and ask yourself the question, was I letting myself, was I really meeting myself where I needed to be in that moment? Which means that month to month, week to week, day by day, and in the early phases where a loss or a death has just happened, your grief is really, really raw, it could be minute to minute. Was I letting myself be where I needed to be? Was I sort of, when I say grief works in mysterious ways, the way I've come to know it is that it has a way of sort of coming up and letting you know what you need to do at that moment if you'll only listen. And know, like have options, know what to do. So when you think about it, I encourage you to meet yourself where you are, because in that way, you will be moving forward in a way that isn't bucking up against, it's not resisting, it's going with it, because that's always your best bet. So what that means when I talk about being flexible, that even means, I realize when people are having acute grief, let's say, typical example would be, person knows that they're going to work, and then they know that they've just sort of been having feelings a lot. They've been bubbling up more, whether they're really mad about it, or they're really weepy, or they're feeling frustrated or irritable about it. They notice it. And so they know that they want to keep their game face on for work, because they just don't feel like, they don't need to handle it in the work environment. They're feeling like that's not professional or that's not necessary, but they don't do it at all. So basically your grief is telling you, I need you to help me out with this stuff, yet you're not letting me. So I want you to think about that. Are you being flexible and saying, hey, this is a day when I'm just going to know that I'm feeling that way? Am I making sure that I create space and time for myself to do whatever I need to do? What I mean by minute to minute, hour to hour, that's where the being intentional comes into play. You basically, when you start to feel the feelings, you say, like, well, go with my gut. What do I feel like I want to do right now? Do I want to get mad? Do I want to go for a walk? Do I need to just get away and move? That's what we do a lot when we're grieving. We're like, I just need to not deal with it right now. I got to move. Or do I feel like I really need to stay in bed a little bit and I need to cry? Whatever it is that you need. Being flexible will really, really help you out the most. The third thing, when I talked about being accepting, I'm absolutely struck by what a number of people do on themselves when they're grieving. So not only are they dealing with this really challenging thing and trying to figure out what the heck is going on, especially when you haven't had many grief experiences in your life, they don't know what's happening to them. Sometimes people feel like they're losing it. I hear it in their language. They're like, what I'm feeling and wanting isn't normal. They question themselves. Also, things change. Then they feel really kind of confused about that, because they don't know that that's the nature of grief. That's very natural. If it wasn't enough for you to be figuring out what's going on, what do I need to do to be working my grief, then on top of it, there is an evaluation of themselves. So if you hear this in yourself, you'll know, because you'll just know that there's sort of that voice. And for those of you who notice it when you're trying to help a loved one and you're aware of how they're managing and you're a little judgy about it, like, I don't think she's handling it that well. Or, wow, he's really lost it because he's started running every day. I want you to think about that. That's being judgy. So for yourself, or in the spirit of you trying to help other people, I want you to pay careful attention to that, because what you don't need is, on top of everything else you're dealing with, to then be evaluating yourself or people you love in a negative way. I promise you, I have never heard anything that someone has said or felt the urge to do when grieving that isn't perfectly within the sphere of normalcy. Yet they can feel really hard on themselves. And that's what I mean by unnecessary struggle. So in terms of that third piece, being accepting, that means that when you notice yourself questioning, doubting, being critical, are you willing to let that go and accept that you're going through something really tough and you're doing your best? And also apply that when you're looking at people in your life you care about. That's working your grief, not getting distracted by the judging and the scoring. So I've outlined really clearly what working your grief is about. Now, the converse, when I said, or it will work you, What does that look like? And I think you'll probably recognize yourself in this. Your grief is going to work you. It is going to show up whether you like it or not. So it's up to you what you do with it. And for people that push through and repress those feelings, push it all down, don't want to talk about it, don't want to feel it ever, not just because they're at work during the day and they just don't need to do it then, or because they've done something I'll talk about in one of my future videos, which is giving themselves a break from their grief, where they say, I'm hurting, I'm going to be hurting for a while, but I need a break from this. Nobody can hurt 24/7. And so they do a planned grief break where they bring some happiness into their day and don't feel guilty about it. What I'm talking about isn't that person. I'm talking about somebody that's just not dealing with stuff. Well, when I say it will work you, there's energy to grief, and it will go underground, and it shows up in things like, you can probably imagine what I'm going to say, because you probably know someone like this. Somebody who you're like, kind of moved on pretty fast from that, or wow, just sort of pushed through, never saw even a crack in it, you know? Too good to be true. It shows up in things like addictive behaviors, like physical manifestations. It shows up in other costly habits, which when I say to you that I think if we do a better job at grieving in our culture, that's another example where people are suffering unnecessarily. Because if you have a major loss, and because you let it work you, it showed up in panic attacks or depression or anxiety where you're using medications to cope with it. That a lot of times just doesn't have to happen. Make sense? Yeah. So it's your choice about what you do with it. When I was immersing myself in the topic of grief recently, it came to me, the idea of compounded interest fits really well with the wisdom commandments about grief. And that is that, think about your loss experiences in your life. Early on, if you figure it out, how to be really powerful and effective, it's just like compounded interest. So what happens when you have an investment and you keep making sure that you're managing it really well, and then you have another one, another loss, and then another grief experience, and another death, and life's going to happen to us, right? We're going to have them. Can't control that. What happens is if we work our grief, we build in our expertise level of grief. And the cool thing is, not only is it great because we hurt, but we don't hurt more than we need to. We struggle only as much as we need to. When we've moved through a grief experience and really, really nailed it, not only do we hurt less, we don't hold on to it, but also we learn how to be a grief expert in our own lives. And that's where the interest comes in, that future losses and deaths in our lives are going to be something that aren't going to slam us as much as they would have if we didn't have the skill. And that's the beauty, that's the collateral beauty of you being willing to do the work of becoming more of a grief expert, is because subsequent losses will be managed by you in a way that you're not going to suffer as much. Conversely, if we look at, the part about grief will work you, we could extend that idea of interest a little bit, in that if, as we move through life, we don't learn and figure out how best to manage, what will happen is that means we'll have unfinished business around it, which we're going to load up. And if we didn't learn it the first time, we didn't learn it the second time, we didn't learn it the third time, pile, you get it? You can even feel it, right? You'll move through your life with an unnecessary burden. Yeah, it's true. And what that means is, not only with each subsequent death or loss experience, the weight's going to be too heavy. You won't be able to just manage it. You're going to carry that with you. So it's so important to have part of your grief experience be letting go. And that's one of the subjects I'm going to cover probably in the second video. What it means to manage your grief powerfully by letting go of pain. Not letting go of the person, not letting go of the thing that you valued, because we'll always honor that. A big part of grieving well is letting go of the pain, yet maintaining a new relationship with that person. That's in another video. I'm giving so much stuff away. Yeah. So when we talk about it in general, whether it's grief or anything else, think about when you are working on something or you just want to have a better mood. We're better off when we're moving through life, making sure we take care of all unfinished business so that we can travel through lighter. And because when we travel through life, because we deal with our stuff as it comes, when we move forward, it's the bonus gift, because not only does it hurt less emotionally, but because we're lighter, we're able to move forward with greater clarity because we have greater energy and we're able to be more productive. It's literally like we have less weight, right? So when you do that moving forward, you can travel a lot farther, right? So that's why it's so important, that commandment, work your grief or it will work you. That brings me to the close. The first video, what I want to encourage you to do is, if you feel like there's something in life, particularly around the area of grief or loss, you can check out how I help people work with any experience really where they're holding on to stuff, whether that's around unfinished business around a loss or just other things in life that we all do. And we learn to do that when I coach people. We spend a big part in the beginning about what's the stuff that I'm holding on to that's holding me back, whether that's beliefs or unfinished business, so that we can get about the business of moving on and making some really cool stuff happen in a way that you're happier in your life. That's really what it's all about. So if you are interested in knowing more about how I do that, how I help people do that, check out my website, leodaskulke.com. You also see how to reach me. So if you have questions about how you're managing or what's going on for you, and if you feel like you want to not struggle as much about it, I can help you do that. Also, in terms of the future videos, because I know you're going to want to look through the whole series, you'll be able to see we're going to put them, we'll have them on YouTube, on Facebook too, but also you can look to follow it up with most of these topics I'm going to be covering on my blog too, so you'll find that on my website. So take what I said to heart. I think about yourself, think about being kind and loving, and that means that you take care of your stuff and move forward powerfully. Take care.